Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Sorry for the late start today. I had to install my new super speedy modem, and they didn't let me know what time it was going to come, so I had to hang around here all day, and it arrived around 2:30 local time. So I unpacked it, removed the old modem cables, put them in their box for return by mail, and then hooked up the new one, and it didn't work. So I had to go through a bunch of diagnostics, and it said that one of the cables wasn't working, which is weird because it was exactly the same cable that I was using before. And so I swapped that out, and then I still had difficulty signing on, so I had to call Shaw and get it worked out. And that left me about, well, I had just about 20 minutes to put the show together, and then 20 minutes to take a shower. And so I'm a little late, but here I am, and I hope that this will be the last that we hear about buffering on the KMG show. I want to start off today by talking about, the Trump coup. Now, there's two ways to understand the Trump coup. The first is that Trump is going to, pull a coup himself. This is what the Democrats are saying. It's projection, of course. That's what the media is saying, projection. But the real coup threat comes from, deep state military officers. There was a novel called 7 Days in May that was published in 1962. It was by Charles W. Bailey II and Fletcher Nebel, and it was a huge bestseller. And in 1964, it was made into a movie by John Frankenheimer, who was on a hot streak at the time. And this was a very popular movie starring Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Frederick March, and Ava Gardner. And the screenplay was written by Rod Serling of Twilight Zone fame. And this is considered one of the movies of Frankenheimer's so-called paranoia trilogy. In the movie, super patriotic generals plan a coup against the President of the United States because he is insufficiently patriotic. And so the heroes, against great odds, managed to thwart this coup. Well, we're remaking 7 Days in May in 2020, in which the traitors are the heroes. It's a weird year, but of course we've been hearing this from the military, from the U.S. military, for really quite some time now. So an article today on Red State by Stu Svirk. It's spelled C-V-R-K. I'm just going to assume that's the pronunciation of his name. The adverse effects of Obama's Executive Order 13583 and the purge of generals and admirals are now obvious. Two disastrous actions taken by Barack Hussein Obama during his presidency have delivered extensive damage to the U.S. military, just as planned. The first was the systematic purging of nearly 200 senior officers over 5 years and their subsequent replacement by Democrat loyalists. His second ignominious action taken was the 2011 Executive Order 13583, directing government-wide diversity and inclusion training, which by 2020 included the implementation of Marxist critical race theory training in all federal agencies, including the U.S. military services. The results from these actions are now crystal clear. Retired Obama-era flag and general officers, in direct violation of Article 88 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, have publicly criticized President Trump and even called him a threat to national security. Some may even be preparing for a military coup, as reported in a shocking video from Colonel Richard H. Black, JAG Corps, a former head of the Army's Criminal Law Division. Other commentators have also noted the deleterious impact of Obama-era policies on the upper ranks of the U.S. military. And it is an absolutely bizarre situation that we find ourselves in. Here's a story which was linked to in the Red State Story from June of this year. Chairman of Joint Chiefs tells troops to uphold the Constitution and says National Guard are under governor's orders in public rebuke to Donald Trump as retired generals slam president, and Jim Mattis, who is aptly nicknamed Mad Dog, compared him to Nazis. And there's also a link to an October 2019 story from the Federalists, why retired military officers need to shut up about politics. Earlier this year, an active duty naval officer stated anonymously, "I keep my mouth shut when it comes to politics for one reason: the barber has to trust me." Neptunius was referring to the awkwardness of an instance where his barber attempted to engage him in a political discussion. As part of the ethos of military professionalism, service members are forced to preserve a facade of nonpartisanship to maintain the public's trust in an institution committed to preserving and defending the entire nation. Not all service members, active or retired, appear to see it that way. Retired Admiral William McRaven, Special Operations Command Commander and Navy SEAL, best known for his involvement in the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, recently authored another op-ed critical of President Donald Trump. McRaven has been a consistent, vociferous critic of the administration from the beginning, as previously reported, but even by his standards, McRaven has gone too far this time. Here's the big point. McRaven seemed intent on getting across: if this president doesn't demonstrate the leadership that America needs, both domestically and abroad, then it is time for a new person in the Oval Office, Republican, Democrat, or Independent. The sooner, the better. The fate of our republic depends on it. Let there be no mistake. McRaven is leveraging the uniform he once wore and the reputation he cultivated in the military to influence readers. Given the readership of the New York Times, this op-ed was clearly intended to reach a wide audience, including potential voters. Of course, the military has been, at least anonymously, talking about a military coup against Trump going back to 2017. And this murmur has risen to a roar in the last month. Trump responded by famously invoking what Dwight D. Eisenhower, President of the United States and four-star general, Commander-in-Chief of Allied Forces in Europe during World War II, had to say at the end of his presidency in his farewell address when he warned against the military-industrial complex, to wit, that there's a strong tendency in the military to look for endless conflict, endless war, endless build-ups in order for greater orders to companies like Raytheon, companies that these generals often end up on the board of after they retire. So is the military against Trump? Well, a recent survey would seem to indicate that that is the case. I don't know whether I believe it. I would suspect that the way that the U.S. military has been run for some decades, that everyone above the rank of colonels, perhaps even above the rank of major, is politically liberal and committed to forever wars and committed to, gender theory and all of the rest of it. But there is support for Trump amongst the military. This is a story from Fox News. A new letter bearing the names of 235 retired U.S. military leaders supports President Trump in what is described as arguably the most important election since our country was founded. Retired Army and Air Force generals and Navy admirals were among those who signed the letter, which was released by the Trump campaign Monday. The former leaders warned against the dangers currently facing the nation and claimed that Trump is better equipped to handle them than his Democratic opponent. Let's look at the introduction of women into the military, particularly the introduction of women into combat roles and the military's decision to put them in all roles, including in the elite forces, like the Rangers, SEALs, etc. they can't pass, but it's made easier for them, and they test again and again and again with a thumb on the scales until they get in. Now, any high-ranking officer who spoke out against this insanity, well, he might not be cashiered, but his promotion would be stopped. That's as far as he would go. We know that the introduction of women into Navy ships has been absolutely disastrous, with an extraordinarily high rate of pregnancy amongst these female sailors. In fact, combat readiness is greatly degraded by the presence of women in all ranks of the services for two reasons. One, they claim women problems for not being able to do their job in any particular day or any particular few days. They get pregnant at an alarming rate. And as history has shown us, in combat situations, women are disastrous for the reason that the men in their units will do foolish things in an attempt to protect them. But no, the U.S. Army is committed to women, 25% women in the Navy. And again, the top leadership of the U.S. Armed Forces are overwhelmingly men who have decided to put their own ambitions first and the security of the nation second. So here's a story from The Federalist by Molly McCann. On September 14th, The Atlantic ran a profile of Alexander Vindman. Vindman was one of the National Security Council officials who listened to the President Trump's July 25th call with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. Vindman blew the whistle and became the star witness in impeachment proceedings against the president. Of course, Vindman was born in the Ukraine, as was his twin brother, also a lieutenant colonel. The Atlantic article cast Vindman as an idealistic patriot. Vindman, who lists defender of the Constitution on his Twitter bio, referenced his reverence for democratic ideals and the U.S. Constitution multiple times throughout the interview. Leftists and militant never-Trumpers throw these terms around as if they are sacred, but in practice trample all over the principles these words represent. One word is Constitution, the other is democracy. The left claims to champion democratic values ad nauseam, yet they have betrayed the most basic of those values in America, the primacy of the will of the people in the peaceful transition of power. Subverting elections is anti-constitution. The United States of America elected Donald Trump in 2016, but the left and entrenched bureaucrats in D.C. refused to accept the new president. They refused to accept the country's choice. What ensued was both a covert attempt at a coup and a public frontal assault on Trump and his administration through an attempted impeachment. The Russian collusion story was a hoax, and everyone knows it. If you are naive, you should at least know the basic fact that there was no collusion, since Robert Mueller's investigation spent millions in taxpayer dollars and several years investigating the claim, only to formally conclude that there was no collusion between Trump and the Russians. If you are paying attention, though, you also know that Russian collusion was concocted as the basis and cover for an attempted coup, a plot to frame and force from office the newly elected President Trump. Vindman knows Russian collusion was an attempted coup, and so does The Atlantic. Because Mueller's investigation concluded there was no collusion and the attempted impeachment was defeated, Vindman is now peddling what amounts to a constructive collusion narrative. Trump has hijacked America's foreign policy to favor Putin. The idea that Trump's forceful and effective foreign policy has been in service to Russia is ludicrous. His record speaks for itself, but the underlying premise of Vindman's silly allegation is deeply flawed and both contrary to the Constitution and democratic values. Government by bureaucracy subverts the Constitution. Vindman wants to argue that foreign policy should be charted by experts within the bureaucracy like himself, who study and determine the best course for America and the world. Experts, I guess, mean people who have been educated at the Kennedy School at Harvard, which now seems to be de rigueur for high-ranking U.S. military officers. The Supreme Court examined the president's supremacy in foreign affairs in the United States versus Curtiss-Wright Export Corporation. That opinion The court drew on constitutional principles and historic documents to reaffirm and emphasize that in this vast external realm with its important, complicated, delicate, and manifold problems, the president alone has the power to speak or listen as a representative of the nation. In short, the president's foreign policy stance is the official foreign policy stance of the United States. Finman's opinion, as expressed in The Atlantic, is that there are guardrails that define what is acceptable U.S. policy. Finally, voters don't pick bureaucrats to rule them. Yes, this is especially noteworthy today when apparently bureaucrats in the health department, or latrine wallas, as Evelyn Waugh would have called them, apparently have now superseded our elected supposed leaders and issue diktats. Oh, and I came across this startling document. It is a poster, actually. It's from the U.S. Army, and it is headed "Diversity is Our Strength," and there is goarmy.com, and there are 5 people pictured. There are 3 women and 2 men. There's a man in a turban. The 3 women appear to be black or Hispanic black, and there is a solitary man on the left who, well, he could be white, I suppose. This is what the text reads. Your United States Army is more diverse than ever in its long history. In fact, your Army is committed to leading the world in building the most diverse organization in the country. That diversity is the reason we are committed to becoming the nation's leader in integrating America's best talent into our ranks. Cultural awareness ensures soldiers have the understanding and compassion necessary to operate in various countries worldwide. Come, join the team that makes a difference in embracing and protecting the world's culture. Embracing and protecting the world's culture. So there's a monoculture in the world. That is the view, the official view of the United States Army. And apparently, if there are countries out there that are deviating from this monoculture, they deserve to be bombed, their people killed, their government's overthrown. Is that the idea? Is this the U.S. Army or the George Soros brigade? There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that diversity makes better armies or any other better organizations. And it would seem, at least on the mass scale, the U.S. military, certainly like the Canadian military, is committed more than anything to being a social experiment. You notice there's nothing in this text about the protection of the United States and its people. How about that? If the purpose of the U.S. Army is not to protect the United States and its people, what good is it? I think that's a reasonable question. Now, you'll recall that The Atlantic, which appears to be become the Deep State Gazette, printed a preposterous story by its editor, who served in the military, not the U.S. military, but the Israeli Defense Force, as no less than a prison guard. Jeffrey Goldberg is the man's name. That Trump hates the military, that he called them losers, etc., etc., etc. I don't believe that Trump would have ever said this, but we're expected to believe that senior military officials heard this 2 years ago and kept stum until just before the election. So, David Pinson tweets, who wrote this Joe Biden speech? Joe Biden, of course, he was demanding an apology from President Trump for words that Trump denied vehemently that he'd ever said. And a question from The Atlantic was arranged in advance of one of Biden's so-called press conferences, in which the disputed statements by Trump were brought up, and the Atlantic reporter asked Biden, what does this say about the state of the president's soul? Anyway, Joe Biden speaks with veterans in Tampa, Florida. David Pinson tweets, he just told a story about a veteran who ran over a woman and her dog, killing them, then put her in his trunk, drove her to a sand pile, and molested her dead body. Then Biden says, we need to end the stigma. No, we don't need to end the stigma. We very much don't need to end the stigma against people who do such things. But it's a curious story to bring up in an address to the troops or to veterans. Look, Joe Biden is bonkers. He's simply bonkers. There is no other way to say it. No other way to say it. Let's see. What does Steve Saylor have to say about this? Updated, today's moment of WTF with Joe Biden. I've now read the full story behind Joe Biden's unexpected speech yesterday about corpse rape. And yeah, the demographics of the necrophiliac psycho killer and his victim who caught Joe's imagination are what readers of Colin Flaherty, but not watchers of Law and Order, would expect. The Democrats and media all unanimously agreed that they will package Joe Biden this fall as a boring, calm, reassuring candidate. The only dissenter is Biden, who sees himself as a man full of surprises, who might say anything, whether it's Thomas Edison not inventing the light bulb or the following disturbing anecdote, which I just related. What the hell was that, Joe? The opening scene of some slow, low-budget slasher movie screenplay you've always wanted to pitch to Hollywood? As I've been pointing out, with his vanity and lack of filter, the second most Trump-like man in American politics is Biden. One difference, though, is that with Trump, it's usually pretty obvious at all times which angle he's working when he brings something up. But with Biden, a lot that spills out of his mouth seems less than calculated, just something that he suddenly felt the need to get off his chest. I presume that Monday's excessively detailed story about the necrophiliac madman was in service to some focus group campaign like more money for veterans' mental health services. But Joe, please, too much information. Colin Flaherty points out the story behind Joe's story from Delaware Online. Ex-soldier sentenced in rape murder case. Army veteran gets life sentence for killing 65-year-old Marsha Lee as she walked her dog in 2011. Yes, an Army veteran has been given 2 life sentences without parole plus 5 years after pleading guilty, but mentally ill, to raping and killing a woman walking her dog in Brandywine Hills. Dwight L. Smith Jr., 28, ran down Marsha Lee, 65, of Wellington with his red SUV in December 2011 while she was walking her dog. He then threw her into his vehicle and drove off, according to authorities. Never specifically mentioned in the text of any articles I've seen, but figure outable from photos and or mentions of the victim's synagogue is that the psycho killer was black and the woman victim was white. Perhaps out of respect for the dead, the articles also tend to skip over the corpse rape part that seized Joe's imagination. Oh, so Joe Biden was giving a speech to an empty room. And, he is appealing to Hispanic voters. Apparently the Biden-Harris campaign, or the Harris-Biden campaign, whichever way you want to look at it, is kind of panic-stricken because Trump is making great inroads with Hispanic voters. So Joe steps out and starts playing Despacito from his phone. Yeah, let's... I suppose Joe Biden, perhaps 30, 40 years ago, would have played La Cucaracha. Despacito is a song by Puerto Rican singer Luis Fonsi, featuring Puerto Rican rapper Daddy Yankee from Fonsi's 2019 studio album, Vida. And the song is in Spanish, but here are some of the words translated into English. Let me surpass your danger zones to make you scream and forget your name. Why, that's Joe Biden to a T. It doesn't get any more Joe Biden than that. Let's go to the chat here. Okay. tan, handsome, suited, booted, blazing speeds. I hope they're blazing. Oh, another funeral home reference. Don't people like flowers? Juan Julio Jimenez says, I'd be surprised if fighting units had been infiltrated yet. I'm sure the Pentagon is riddled with them, ergo CIA. Oh, your stamens are showing back there, says Coachalongo. Love the audio, though. Glad to hear it. Again, from Juan Julio, these military-industrial complex revolving door types know which side their bread is buttered. And again, I suspect majority of fighting troops support Trump. Yes, I very much believe that as well. And from the same source, look at the damage female street cops have done, let alone soldiers. Well, I would say that compassion is probably more important for policemen or police officers, sorry, than for soldiers, in that I've just seen video after video after video after video where a female police officer goes in alone, completely misreads the situation, and before you know it, she is emptying her pistol into whoever is in the vicinity, simply because they have neither the size nor the strength nor the force of will to submit, to get people to submit without the use of deadly force. Brandon Smith says the future is nameless, faceless, and androgynous. Okay. Let's see, from Justin Proto, who are these Beltway Tyrians kidding? Russian infantry would stomp our modern woke infantry, no contest. Yeah, it's not that simple, though, because it's a question of air power, isn't it? And to paraphrase Hilar Belloc, we have, or that is to say, the United States has total air superiority, and everyone else does not. Metal Mike, Fabricland Karen, I'm getting to her. Don't worry about it. There was another link that I wanted to see here. Oh, yeah, here we go. This is Johnny Joey. Excuse my vulgar tweet. I'm absolutely furious right now. Joe Biden just told a story about a Marine veteran with a traumatic brain injury running over a woman. I'm assuming he meant PTSD, killing her and her dog, then driving off with her body and molesting her. He then used that story to say that we need to end the stigma. This is the kind of Hollywood war to evil narrative that's both discredited by statistical information and medical opinion, and extremely harmful to veterans suffering from the effects of war. These vets do hurt themselves too often, but they very rarely hurt others. They lose their will to live, not their souls. This is a disgusting display of inept pandering, void of conscience or fact. And y'all want us to care about anonymous sources when he's saying that. Wow. Yeah, that story does not really reflect well on the U.S. military. But I guess, what was it that, was it George Bush the first said, message, I care? I believe it was him. And I think that's what Joe is trying to get across. So, story from Town Hall here. At this point, it's pretty much all about getting out the vote. Well, not all. I don't know, maybe there's 10 or 15% of the voters which are undecided. But so many people have voted early and are going to vote early. So that last minute undecided block is going to be much smaller than it has in the past. President Trump is tapping into a new demographic, the Stoolies. In July, Barstool Sports and the White House released a video of Barstool founder Dave Portnoy, commonly known to his supporters as El Prez, interviewing Trump in the Rose Garden. The segment, just over 20 minutes long, made an immediate splash in the media and put Barstool Sports alongside the likes of Fox News, Axios, and other news outlets that have secured a coveted one-on-one interview with the president. Yet Barstool Sports isn't a traditional news organization. It's a sports media site catering to millennials and Gen Z sports fans. Portnoy, who founded the company in 2003, continues to maintain that he is apolitical. However, his 2019 Twitter war with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and frequent appearances on Fox News suggests otherwise. Further, El Prez has not been shy about his support for President Trump, and the Rose Garden interview moved the company even further into the political eye, despite objections from Barstool's staff. The company's fans, affectionately named Stoolies, are broadly college-educated, middle-class, high-noon connoisseurs with a deep passion for sports. But most of all, Stoolies young and old are drawn into the Barstool brand by Dave Portnoy himself. El Prez has centered Barstool Sports around an opposition to political correctness and cancel culture, earning them a following that values one's ability to voice their opinions unapologetically. Barstool and their followers alike continue to prioritize the freedom of speech over the right to not be offended. While traditionally Barstool fans are not the first demographic you would expect to be jumping in line at the polls, Portnoy's recent foray into politics is starting to have the same effect as his foray into investing. A Morning Consult survey shows that Barstool sports fans are younger, more Republican, and more politically engaged than the overall public. This is something that certainly isn't lost on President Trump and his re-election campaign. Oh, yes. Trump gave an interview to George Stephanopoulos, Town Hall, and according to Daniel Dale, it was a fire hose of lying. And of course, I want to salute my fellow Canadian, Daniel Dale, formerly of the Toronto Star, for his outstanding transition from being a cast member of Glee to his position now at CNN. I mean, I can never forget that night when he did the mashup of Tainted Love and I Want to Know What Love Is. It was absolutely fabulous and brought a tear to my eye, and I dare say to millions of eyes. Kudos, Daniel Dale. Let's see what a J5 killer has to say. Until this weekend, I wasn't as confident in Trump's victory as I was in 2016. On Thursday, I was at about 80%. By Sunday night, I was at 100%. In other words, I'm exactly as confident in Trump's re-election as I was in his election in 2016. In September 26, I did a podcast with, me. Toward the end, KMG asked me to predict the election. I said that I was completely certain Trump would win and that he'd win Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and North Carolina and get 310 electoral votes. Pretty good. I mentioned my accurate 2016 prognostication simply to prove that I was completely confident in Trump's victory in the run-up to 2016. I could feel it. I'm feeling exactly the same way right now. I can feel it. Until this weekend, three things that held me back. The first is that Trump's campaign message and focus seemed off, like he was just missing the target in his speeches and ads. The second was that while the enthusiasm for him seemed strong, it didn't seem as strong as 4 years ago. The third is, and may Allah forgive me, the polling doesn't look good. Trump is not running behind the 2016 in polls so much as Biden is running better than Hillary. This weekend's Nevada rallies were as good as any in 2016. As for the polls, the reason the polls were making me nervous is that I remember the 2018 midterms. Then I started seeing the crowds and watching how they react to Trump, and I'm all F the pollsters. Trump's voters would crawl through hell to vote for him. I know I would. It was the enthusiasm that convinced me to ignore the polls in 2016. It's the enthusiasm that's convinced me to ignore the polls in 2020. But beyond enthusiasm, I've also figured out that it's not just the pollsters are cooking the books, it's that they are also using traditional turnout models that don't account for the insane enthusiasm of Trump's white working class voters. The Democratic nabobs have repeatedly said that non-college white males who didn't vote in 2016 are the Dems' nightmare scenario for 2020. There are 495 of those in Wisconsin, 250,000 in Minnesota, and 1.6 million of them in Michigan. Trump and Brad Parscale and others have said that Trump's campaign has been targeting this group and Hispanics. He's going to juice the turnout of working class whites. And a story from Politico. Trump drives massive turnout in primaries despite token opposition. He got twice as many votes in the primaries as Barack Obama did as an incumbent. So that seems to be good news. So I'm going to close the window here. I had the window open because it is hot and muggy here, made worse by the ever-present pall of smoke from California and Oregon, which has come up the coast. We had heavy rain last night and this morning, which I had hoped would dissipate the pall, but now the pall is back as thick as ever. There is traffic, which I'm sure you could hear, so just bear with me for a moment, and I am going to close the window. That's better. So let's talk about something that happened in Calgary. Fabricland Karen is from Calgary, and her real name is Jan Walsh. This is from Dean Blundell or Blundell. I don't know who this. He's a radio host in Calgary, I believe. Oh, he's a Canadian radio personality, best known as a longtime morning host on CFNY FM The Edge in Toronto. In 2015, he was named the new morning host on sports radio station CJCL Sportsnet 590, The Fan. Okay. He begins. The fabric land in question is in Calgary. The maskless hoaxer's name is Jan Walsh, and her Facebook pictures are to effing die for. That was Jan on Saturday at a factory outlet Fabricland sale of the century without a mask. She went apeshit crazy when a customer asked her to mask up. Also a douche move. You'll never be able to make sense to a nut wing, so you're just begging for a scrap. That's a bad sentence. He had tweeted, Fabricland Karen needs to be shot out of a cannon into the sun. Decent thigh gap for a dino. Thigh gap? Really? It turns out that Jan has a Facebook profile where she posts performative pictures like every other sad person on Facebook, but hers include the greatest Xmas card photos with her 2 effing cats and a husband whose eyes say, I tapped out years ago. And so there's a bunch of pictures of her and her husband, and they're each holding a cat. Holy shit, I don't see a happy man in those eyes. I see help. I'm not going to use this platform to tear this woman apart physically. I think you have. I'll crush her any more than you guys already have, or will after you read this, but her use of filters can't disguise those yellow teeth. This was her with the only other man. It gets very vulgar here. I'm not going to repeat that. And here's Festive Jan and her hubby in the early days of their marriage. How do I know it's the early days? He looks like he still has the will to live, despite being made to dress like an effing elf for Xmas pictures at Walmart. Hey, people like Jan, before your next public shit fit, ask yourself this question. Do I want this to be my digital legacy? Do you? I don't think you do, because then some asshole from a little blog in Canada pumps it out to a few million people and whammo. You're an unemployable international example of unstable, no bueno. And how about Walsh's, the husband's physical deterioration from Christmas to Christmas? Oh, he went bald, as many men do. There's actually a scientific name for it. It happens to a great many men. Interestingly enough, it's not passed on from the father. It's passed on from the father-in-law. So there's 62 comments here, and people are pretty much screaming for her blood. There's a few people who are in opposition to this, to ruining this woman's life. If she were screaming in my face like that, she would have found herself laying on the floor, because I would have given her the headbutt of her life and knocked her crazy, ignorant ass out. This is from Lisa. She deserves to be public shamed for her behavior. So good for you, Dean. Eric writes, LOL, the irony of clutching your pearls and shrieking Karen, but I get it. You need to emasculate yourself in order to keep your fancy boy job. Actually, a yokel says maybe it's time to let Dean Blundell's employer, CFNY The Edge in Toronto, know how we feel about his online bullying and shaming. He responds, hey, Shannon, I just want you to know I'm totally sorry about whatever it is you're angry about. If you'd like to escalate your cancellation of Dean, please email his boss and he'll get back to you. Oh, yeah, there was all of these women basically saying that this other woman should be destroyed. Is everyone in support of her not understanding that it's the law to wear a mask in public in Calgary? Should she also be able to decide which stoplights or traffic laws she will obey, or whether she's too drunk to drive after a few drinks? You think we're all sheep because we obey the law? She clearly not stated in any humane manner that she was medically exempt. I have serious doubts she is. She was rude, invaded personal space, just like, masks don't invade personal space. Demeaning and all over a disgrace of a human being during a time when people are dying every day from the virus. I myself have one lung and I'm dead if I get this. And to see her actions horrifies me. It's people like her that makes the risk 10 times worse. We all need to work together and support each other. Selfish idiots like her should be in quarantine, not the rest of us that are obeying the law. Know what you get when everyone just does what they want and doesn't obey the law? Anarchy. I don't recall the same sort of reaction when we had our Black Lives Matters marches in Canada. I also don't recall this great support for order against anarchy when Native Indians and their white and Asian allies were deciding to wreck our train service earlier this year. No, that was a question of justice. There was a picture of her kissing some sort of statue. Someone says, why is she kissing a statue? These things are full of germs, like children's snot flaces, homeless urine, and pigeon bombs. I bet you she licks her fingers while counting cash. Oh, Mary Hartle responds, wow, bet she thinks the Holocaust didn't happen and the world's flat too. The rest of us in the country with an IQ past the double digits can't believe dummies like her are walking amongst us. And she says we should get educated. Maybe she would like to get on a plane and fly to India, then to Brazil, and then catch a cruise ship to Florida. I will chip in to send her. Who's with me? Guarantee she wouldn't think it's fake when she gets it. Stupid people like her should be locked up to protect the rest of us. Also, I bet she has no medical reason for not wearing. Being crazy and stupid are not medical reasons for not a mask. By the way, Karen, we are scared of bitches like you, but you should run away, not us. Yes, regardless of what you believe, she does not have the right to be in someone's personal space. Again, masks seem to be very much people's personal spaces. That is the whole point of it. Oh, Trixie, who is a person I've come across on Twitter, says, this is brilliant. I must confess being disappointed in Canadians on this story. In the US, the Twitter mob would have already ensured she'd lost her job and been otherwise shamed and humiliated, and deservedly so. Or maybe her full-time job is to clean out the litter boxes and terrorize her husband. Wait, no, of course, she makes him clean out the litter boxes. To which I responded, why do women love tyranny? Oh, another Karen trying to use her white privileges. And again, someone pointing out that Calgary law states every person must wear a mask in any building. I suspect that these people, if health authorities said that it was required for whatever reason for them to hop on one foot, they would do that too and attack everyone who said, no, this is preposterous. Us hopping on one foot. I had pointed out last night in the comments section, Alberta has 39 hospitalizations and 7 ICU cases in a province of 4.4 million people. The average age of death is 83. This isn't a crisis. It's barely an event. Stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Also, there's no evidence that masks work. Even the World Health Organization has admitted that. There was a response from Charles Bailey. Hardly an event. Been paying attention the last several months? Believe what you will, but you know this. The virus has killed millions worldwide and continues to do so. There's currently no vaccine, and Calgary does have a city bylaw maintaining masks indoors everywhere. Masks work. Stay 2 meters apart and wash your damned hands, fool. Again, I wonder if Charles Bailey knows how many people live in the world and how many people die every year. Oh, Judith Simpson said, actually, this is why we're in trouble in Alberta. We have the most COVID in Canada per 100,000. And again, 39 hospitalizations and 7 ICU cases. But I guess that's 39 hospitalizations and 7 ICU cases too many. I mean, there's no other way to describe this. And as far as masks go, even the UN's own website is still promoting the recent WHO advice that masks are unnecessary for healthy people. This is from Graham Neary. According to BBC reporter Deborah Cohen. Oh, here's what it says. This is the UN is asked, I am well and asymptomatic, should I wear a mask? According to the WHO, for individuals without respiratory symptoms, a medical mask is not required as no evidence is available on its usefulness to protect non-sick persons. However, masks might be worn in some countries according to local cultural habits. If masks are used, best practices should be followed on how to wear, remove, and dispose of them, and on hand hygiene action after removal. For more information, visit the WHO guidance on the use of masks in the community. And Deborah Cohen of the BBC, this was back in July, reported, we had been told by various sources WHO committee reviewing the evidence had not backed masks, but they recommended them due to political lobbying. This point was put to WHO, who did not deny. I wonder who it was that was bullying the WHO. Let's go back to the chat here. Anything less than NATO gas masks doesn't do it, says Juan Julio. John S. says, COVID is real, but for all intents and purposes, it might as well be I'm not going to repeat that word, but I think people can figure out what I mean. Neil Terry says, it's like libs from Biden to rioters to your average jerk on social media. It's a composition to see who can be the most ugly, useless, and insane. My Trail of Disgrace says, these people's maliciousness and schadenfreude is unreal. The sales clerks don't make the laws, says Metal Mike. Yes, I understand this. And these clerks were just doing their jobs. Why did she lash out at them? Because, well, you could actually make that argument about, anyone who was just doing their jobs. I understand that it's, unpleasant for these people, and it's unfortunate. But when people are asked to do something which is stupid, unnecessary, and induces a great anxiety, I suppose that is going to be the result. Fabricland Karen did say that COVID is a HOAX and that nobody's sick. Well, as far as what she meant by that, I don't know. But effectively, given the population of Alberta, nobody is sick there. Look, the situation is the same pretty much in Alberta as it is in Ontario and British Columbia, that the virus has pretty much carried off everyone that is going to carry off. And as far as the average age of death, it's 83 in Alberta, and I suspect it is very similar in both BC and Ontario. And yet, I'm seeing now more masks than I have ever seen, perhaps because I've moved from Vancouver Island to the mainland. I'm seeing these people with masks outdoors, and these people are they're broken. They're absolutely broken. Either that or they are deeply stupid, because take a look around, look up. Look to the left, look to the right, look behind you. Do you see how much air is there? Have you ever seen anyone smoking a cigarette outdoors? You see how quickly the smoke dissipates? And these particles of COVID-19 virus are much, much smaller than that. Much, much smaller. But no, let's just wear masks everywhere. I mentioned last week that I saw a woman, a Chinese woman in a car a couple of blocks from here. I don't know, what was it? I think it was a BMW. She was wearing a mask in the driver's seat, and she had a her baby in a child seat in the back, and it was wearing a mask. I don't think that mask is going to stay on for very long. So she thinks that she can practice social distancing from her baby? How's that going to work? Is the milk going to be delivered on a 6 feet long, or sorry, 2 meters? That's more than 6 feet. A 2 meter long tube? Is some sort of Rube Goldberg contraption going to be constructed in order to burp the baby? And I don't even want to imagine how diaper changing would work with social distancing. But the mask imperative, it's pretty clear what's going on now. Look, it can't be denied any longer. CDC director says masks might be better than vaccines. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This is by Ricardo Alonso Zaldivar of the Associated Press. Polls show skepticism for public about safety timing of vaccines. CDC Director Robert Redfield has told the Senate committee that face masks may offer more individual protection against COVID-19 than a potential coronavirus vaccine, according to reporter Max Burns. Burns said CDC Director Redfield explicitly says he considers face masks to be a better safeguard against COVID-19 than even a potential vaccine. Quote, "We have clear scientific evidence they work." No, you're lying. This face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID-19 than when I take a COVID vaccine. Okay, two things. What's the rush for the vaccine then? Or is simply this an admission that the vaccines are going to be useless? Second, and this is the big story, apparently it is masks forever. Everyone is going to be bullied into or be required to wear a mask at all times in the future. Well, until further notice, and to hell with that. I think this is where the rebellion starts. From Breitbart, President Donald Trump on Tuesday repeated that he did not want to issue a national mask mandate during the coronavirus pandemic. There is, by the way, a lot of people who don't want to wear masks, Trump said. There are a lot of people who think that masks are not good. The president commented on masks after a voter from an ABC News town hall hosted by George Stephanopoulos asked him why he did not support the mandate. He recalled witnessing waiters serving at a restaurant touching their masks to adjust them and then touching the plates. The concept of a mask is good, but you're constantly touching it, touching your face, touching plates. These are the people that don't think masks are good. Trump recalled that Joe Biden called for a national mask mandate during his convention speech, but backtracked on the idea. They checked out and they didn't do it, Trump said. He also defended his initial response to the virus, despite complaints that he downplayed its deadly nature at the beginning of the crisis. I didn't downplay it, Trump said. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action. Well, yes, holding a daily press conference does not seem like downgrading COVID-19 to me. He argued that his decision to ban travel from China saved millions of lives at a time when Democrats criticized the idea. I was so far ahead on my closing, he said, noting that Biden was talking about the threat as exaggerated, and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, no, she is the House Speaker, was calling for people to come visit Chinatown in San Francisco. He also defended his statement that the virus would disappear. It's going to disappear, George, he said. We're going to get back. He said that the development of vaccines and herd immunity would help the virus go away. It's going to be a herd development, and that's going to happen. That will all happen. But with a vaccine, I think it will go away very quickly. But of course, the CDC is now implicitly stating that the virus is not going to be much cop. Oh, here's an interesting story, which is unrelated, but I'm going to go to it anyway. From Alam Bakari, Twitter locked conservative activist CJ Pearson out of his account yesterday, forcing him to delete a tweet that the company says violated its abuse and harassment policies. The tweet attacked pedophiles. Every pedophile in America should be castrated, said Pearson, who was promptly locked out of his account. Twitter spokesman told Breitbart that the tweet violated the platform's policies against abuse and harassment, meaning Pearson would have to delete the tweet before remaining access to his profile. This was not a specific threat. After condemning child predators, Twitter gave me the boot, said Pearson upon returning to Twitter. I refuse to change my political stances for Twitter, and I will never cave to the mob. Last month, an investigation by a London-based group of parents found that pedophiles were still active on Twitter using emojis as code to spread inappropriate images of children. Well, I don't know. They got Netflix behind them, right? And there seems to be a lot of activity. We saw Slate and others. Oh, yes, what's all this hysteria about pedophilia? Yeah, you know very well why there's hysteria, because it's being normalized before our eyes. Let's look and see what Alex Berenson has to say. Who wants to tell the CDC that the only people who haven't already returned to normal life are a few million Karens and Neils, the educational bureaucracy, the elite media, and the Democratic Party? This is in response to the CDC saying that America should have enough coronavirus vaccine to return to regular life by the third quarter of 2021. Yeah, that doesn't really include the bit about still having to wear masks. Okay. Yes, and I'm looking at a picture of a child in what appears to be kindergarten or perhaps preschool wearing a mask. And it's a good idea. Isn't this what child development experts say, that it's a good idea to expose children to terror as soon as possible? You know, not the terror of fairy tales, of, Grimm and whatever, but no, directly, by letting them know that everyone in the world is a direct threat to their lives. They must be isolated from everyone else. They must go to school in bubbles. Oh, and they must all face in the direction and all of the rest of it. Oh, I see. Someone, Kyle Felcher, was mocking the idea of herd immunity. And Berenson said, fact check, you can't be this dumb. Even if herd immunity estimate of 60% is right, it's wrong. CNN doesn't know the difference between reported cases and actual infections, which are 10 times as high. So this estimate is off by a factor of at least 10. William Briggs writes, the science cannot be questioned, denier. All governments cracking down and removing liberties from citizens over corona doom say they do so because of the science, not because of just plain science or even evidence, because the science says so. The science is, of course, whatever government dictates it should be. Government takes a line and declares it to be uncrossable, permanent, and guaranteed gold-clad capital S science. Give any skepticism, including true disproving evidence about the science, and one is labeled a denier. Now, where have we heard that before? Climate change. And of course, we heard it with Lysenkoism, notoriously in the Soviet Union. And isn't it curious that the solution, the science dictates, is always the same whenever the science is invoked? Greater restrictions on your liberties, greater progressive government control in all perpetuity. Take the state of Victoria in Australia, which is cracking down on deniers. It's worth thinking about them because this is the direction all progressive governments are going. This will happen wherever progressives take over. Here is the state of the crisis in all of Victoria, not just Victoria. Deaths, and they're down to pretty much zero. That's a 6 at the end in attributed deaths, which are greater than actual deaths in their normal cold and flu death season. There is no crisis in Australia. How are politicians reacting to this non-crisis? With policemen with their stupid orange jackets and with their military-style helmets on horses. Oh, and the horses have little fluorescent devices on their legs. The science states that you are allowed to be outside for 1 hour every day. At 61 minutes, the science says corona doom will get you. If you sit during the corona-free hour, the corona doom will also get you. The just following orders, police nabbed a pregnant woman for her crime of sitting during a declared crisis. Also in Australia, the science says just following orders, police should stomp on those violating curfew. They put one man in a coma. At least this man won't die of corona doom. Strangely, somebody in the Just Following Orders police department thought the science said to paint a radar trace hexagram over the city using a plane. In Quebec, the science says even cars can't come within so many feet of each other, meters. In the UK, the science says if you gather in groups of 6 or fewer, corona doom can't get you. Have 7 and everybody surely dies. Boris Johnson, the Conservative leader, wants COVID marshals to enforce the rule of 6. But we wonder whether the presence of these Just Following Orders police count toward group totals. Boris also thinks the science will tell us who gets a freedom pass and who doesn't. Also in the UK, the science says deaths of any cause within 28 days of a positive corona doom test must be counted as corona doom deaths. In the USA, the science says if you stand up in a restaurant unmasked, the corona doom will get you. But if you sit unmasked, smacking your lips, belching, scratching, farting, and sharing food, it can't get you. On and on it goes with contradictory rules everywhere. The science says one thing at A, which the science at B says is false, and vice versa. But it's all the science, and the science cannot be questioned. Yes, Governor Whitmer awarded herself a continuation of dictatorial powers until the 1st of October, her previous power grab ending on September 4th. And let's look at those deaths. And they're pretty much down to 0. There's no emergency in Michigan and hasn't been for months. These, don't forget, are attributed deaths, meaning the actual count is lower. So I had spoken last week. Sorry about the congestion. As I say, we here are just being inundated with acrid smoke, and that is the reason for it. I was speaking of President Eisenhower's farewell address, and he said some things which were relevant, of course, not only to the question of the military-industrial complex, but also to science, and they just seem remarkably prescient considering the preposterous and sinister situation that we are in today. And I'm just going to repeat this, that in the revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted by or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor tinkering in his shop has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society. Well, the supreme goals of our society now are supposedly that latrine wallahs should be given dictatorial powers. A journalist for the Toronto Star is very angry that some people in the media are paying attention to anti-mask protests. One from Utah, and someone from the ABC affiliate there, a young lady called Katie Corrales, did a report on Utah anti-mask protest. And Adrian Chung responded, "This is bad journalism to its core. Local people upset at thing is not journalism. It doesn't add knowledge or context. It really only gives airtime to factually wrong and fringe views. What does Black Lives Matter except that local people upset at thing? Oh, and airtime to factually wrong and fringe views, like the police or King James LeBron said that every time a black person in America leaves his home, he is literally being hunted. That strikes me as factually wrong and fringe, but we've been hearing this over and over and over again. I responded to Adrian Chung. You would have been right at home in the Soviet Union. Soon enough, you and the rest of the Toronto Star will be railing against wreckers, saboteurs, and kulaks. From Lockdown Skeptics, according to the ONS, which is a government agency, the Office for National Statistics, flu and pneumonia have killed more people than COVID since June. This is the Telegraph has reported this story, but there's another pretty striking finding in the second paragraph too. Just 78 people died of coronavirus in the week ending September the 4th, the latest for which death registrations are available. The first time the figure has fallen below 100 since lockdown began in March. Just 1% of the deaths now mention coronavirus on the death certificate compared to 12.8%, which mention influenza and pneumonia, making those conditions nearly 13 times more deadly. The numbers of overall deaths have also plummeted well below the 5-year average for England and Wales, with 1,443 deaths in the most recent weekly figures. And he gives a shout out to Noel Gallagher, who we spoke about yesterday. A nation of bedwetters. Unfortunately, Noel Gallagher is an outlier. YouGov, which is a polling firm, has just published some depressing polling. A whopping 69% of Brits and a majority of all age groups say they would support a 9 p.m. curfew on pubs and bars to help reduce COVID-19 cases. As Julia Hartley Brewer asked on Twitter, what the hell has happened to our country? She said, it's almost my bedtime, so this wouldn't actually impact me much. She's referring to the aforementioned poll. But what the hell has happened to this country? We used to be, fun. Well, you can't have fun and be healthy. I believe experts, the science has demonstrated this over and over again. Who are they railing against? Young people. They're railing against young people. People going to the park, people going to the beach, people going to nightclubs, people going to parties. And I really think that what we're seeing here is, to a very large extent, the traditional hatred that old people have for young people, because young people are healthier, have more vitality, optimism, etc. It's been traditional for old people to, as far as possible, keep this hatred of the young to themselves. But in this event, they can't. But going back to what I was saying about Alberta, it would appear that even until you're in your 80s, COVID-19 is not really much of a threat. What explains this? Well, I suppose it's the replacement of lateral modes of information transition with top-down, the top-down mode of transition, the top-down mode from government, from the media, from academia. People no longer get news, opinions, claims from each other. They get it from centralized institutions, which simply have, they have an agenda. Government seeks to become ever larger. And the media now, which is practically an arm of the government, the real government, not Trump's government, because we know he's illegitimate, right? They all said that. And of course, in Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau's government gave a bailout, which may not be a one-time bailout, of $595 million to the media. That doesn't sound like very much money, but keep in mind that Canada is a small country in terms of population, and $595 million is a lot of money. I'll further clarify that in Canada, the media is highly vertically integrated with telcos, radio stations, TV stations, newspapers. And so the Competition Bureau and the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television or Telecommunications Commission, their decisions are life and death to the semi-monopolies that control the media in Canada. And so they have a tendency to support whichever government is in power because they don't want that government to punish them. Canadian media companies typically go to government agencies and ask to be able to break the law. To give an example, the National Post was bought after it went bankrupt. It was bought some years ago by two American hedge funds owning about 70% of the paper. This is illegal under Canadian law, which requires that 50.1% of all cultural properties must be owned by Canadians, cannot be owned by foreigners. But the National Post had been a regular supporter of Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, so he rubber-stamped this in the same way that he rubber-stamped the illegal takeover of Atlantic Alliance, which is the company which distributes films in Canada and also owns several television properties in North America. They were taken over by Goldman Sachs, which is plainly illegal under Canadian law, and Stephen Harper's government rubber-stamped this, saying that even though that Goldman Sachs would be in control of 75% of the company, they wouldn't interfere in the running of the company. No, of course they wouldn't. I mean, you'd have to be very cynical indeed to believe that a company, especially one as arrogant as Goldman Sachs, the mere fact that it owns 75% of a company would mean that it would actually want to run the place. Okay, let's go back to the chat here. All right. Tell a lie enough and you become CNN, says Juan Julio. That's pretty good. I like that. Yo Mama says, have you seen The Young? I have seen them. I see them all the time. As I say, I live right across the street from a mall, one of the largest in Canada. So I see them. Yes, and it is distressing to see them for all sorts of reasons. I won't go into tremendous detail. It just, when I went to school a very long time ago, in classes which were much larger than they are today, typically 30 to 35 students in the class, there was always one fat kid. There was one, and there was only one fat kid in the class. Now in classes, what the school size is mandated in my province at 20 or 22. It's like 15 of these kids are fat. And several of them are really fat indeed. How can you be fat at 10 years old? How is that possible? How many calories are you taking in daily? Are you taking like 4,000 calories, 5,000 calories a day, more? But no. Yes, to answer the question, I have seen The Young. William Hicks says our society has prioritized the old over the young for quite some time now. Massive deficit spending, Social Security, Medicare, bailouts. Well, as I said previously, I believe that's coming to an end by necessity. Because with longevity increasing for people who don't commit suicide or get addicted to drugs. So that is to say that it is now. My father died of COVID earlier this year in May. He was 89 years old. That is very old indeed. It used to be very rare for people to live over the age of 80. Well, now we have people living over the age of 90. Now we have people living over the age of 100. And the costs, not just the medical costs and the pension costs, the costs of long-term care, they're prohibitive. They're not seen as prohibitive yet, but they will soon be seen as prohibited, as the number of, well, not just boomers, but silents, like my father was, get to be in the position where they need permanent long-term care. KMG, another book, Crisis and Leviathan. Was that Sam Francis? Because I discussed that book. on Luke Ford's show when I was doing my book club there. Neil Terry says, 47 and a smoker, but I'm better shape than half the high school kids around here. I have no doubt about it. High school kids used to, I don't know, they used to do a lot of walking, a lot of running around. Of course, it is now, again, I find this remarkable. It is now considered pretty much a form of child abuse to let your child walk to school and walk back. They must be driven to school by parents, and they must be picked up by parents. Children are naturally full of energy, but that's dangerous now. That's why we give them Ritalin and other drugs to fight an imaginary condition called ADHD, the parameters of which are so broad that you show me a list of 100 people and I could say that 80 out of the 100 had it. No, we want to dope people up. We want to dope them up with drugs. We want to dope them up with food, high fructose corn syrup. We want to dope them up with computer screens and smartphone screens. I guess they're more tractable that way. And of course, we want to dope them up with marijuana. Cigarettes, they increase brain power, at least short term, whereas marijuana does the opposite. I've described marijuana legalization as urban pacification, and everything that's happened since then simply convinced me of that. Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this. Yo Mama asks, yes, I don't. I've seen the death certificate for my father because there's an endless, unpleasant process going about with regard to his will, with one family member having declared war on everyone else. I'm not that family member. It's a different one. But I've seen the death certificate, and it does not list a cause of death. We know that he tested positive for COVID-19. A couple of days before he died, one of my siblings contacted the hospital or extended care place where he was, and, well, what's wrong with him? He has COVID-19. No. But what is wrong with him? What are his conditions? Oh, lethargy. Lethargy is not a disease. So we never really got to the bottom of that. Okay, scientists are supposed to be skeptical. That's, I don't know, do they still teach this in school? You got your Galileos and the like, right? Yes, but this is actually true. It doesn't care what the church says, or it doesn't care, it doesn't matter what the authorities say. And there's all these examples of heroic scientists standing up against the hegemony of the day, against the consensus, but now they're all supposed to march in lockstep. And people who disagree, even people with the facts behind them, like the COVID-19 skeptics, are compared to Holocaust deniers. And the clear implication there is these people are going to be stripped of their rights. They are going to be expelled from society. Let's see. Now the quality is so good. Where will the stream drama come from? No. I want to put this. I want to put this behind me. And I guess I hadn't really thought this through. That even though I was using Wi-Fi, when I was in the apartment of doom, you remember, starting about 5 o'clock, we got this nightmarish bright light, creating this sort of California noir effect on the stream. It was using the same kind of modem that I am using now. So, Neil Terry, again, the stream quality is great now. I thought there was a hiccup earlier, but it was my own junky internet service cutting out. Based suicide pact thing. What? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Yako Rapala says, yeah, an hour of good quality audio and video. We should all mention that since we've been complaining so much. No, but I really should. thank you for complaining so much, because it was your complaining about the constant buffering that led me to the what should have been rather obvious solution to my problem, which is I needed to spend $70 more a month on a faster internet connection. BLM is a billionaire club, says Juan Julio. Yes, I noticed this woman who is the daughter of this family, was a Sandler family, one of the most sketchiest families involved in the real estate collapse, the dodgy mortgage collapse in the United States. So she's giving $200 million to these people and their ilk. Apologies for the smoke, but the burning of California will continue for the foreseeable future. I haven't really focused on that much, but I'm curious about this. I mean, it's going to come to an end sometime, right? Or is the view that the burning of these forests is maybe a good thing because cutting down trees, to build things with is, or to, to make Kleenex, toilet paper, baby wipes. Wow. The progressives really hate baby wipes. That is a bad thing. So maybe we're better off without these trees. Maybe it's better for the trees to die nobly in a fire than to die ignobly by being harvested by foresters. It always shocks me how easy money inheritance destroys family relations. We're not talking about an enormous amount of money here, but I've learned long ago that it doesn't really require an enormous amount of money to derange people. Metal Mike says scientists are not allowed to be skeptical. The climate change consensus only exists because those who question it are ostracized. Well, as Eisenhower predicted, they don't get the federal grants. Roughly before 1900, say pretty much all, or the great majority of science was done by disinterested amateurs. We don't have any disinterested amateurs anymore because science is a lot more expensive than it used to be. So you need the government money. And if you disagree with the government position, you don't get the government money. So you're going to be fired from your lab. You're not going to have a job teaching at a university anymore or doing research at a university. You're going to have to find something else to do. Adderall increases brain power. Yes, it does. Oh, Neil Terry says California's fire situation is 100% neglect, just another liberal hypocrisy. I mean, I've been reading this for 20 years. The change in the philosophy vis-a-vis forest management, that the trimming of forests, if you will, sending in foresters to clean away, smaller trees, undergrowth, or whatever, the tinder in forest fires was bad. Again, the planted axiom here seems to be that forestry itself is bad. Most educated people know the problem of induction. Do you know how hard it is to find the primary cause of anything? I don't believe in induction, Dionysus. I believe in deduction. I think that it is impossible. People act on their prejudices. They always act on their prejudices. When people are researching things, it's always arbitrary. It's, oh, yes, I'm just going to study that. I don't have any opinions about that at all. And what the results are going to be, of no interest to me. No, I don't believe it. Neil Terry says the climate hysterics couldn't care less about real environmental threats or real resource management. Oh, like induction ovens. Okay, very funny. Juan Julio. Okay, let's get back to it here. Oh, yes. You know who's suffering most because of coronavirus? Yeah, it's women. Of course it would be women. Oh, yes, and minorities. They always suffer the most. There's just no end. There's no end to their suffering. And there was a rather amusing story here from the insider.com, Eleanor Goldberg Fox, a scientist mom. You like that cute word there, mom? See, we wouldn't use mother. She's a scientist, which is, pretty important, but she's also a mom. I didn't see any mention of a dad in this story. She does it surrounded by toys because of course she would, and shared the photo to show the impossible situation working parents face. Gretchen Goldman got a familiar call on Tuesday. She had 45 minutes to prepare for an interview with CNN regarding the Trump administration's appointments of a climate science denier. Oh no, to a top federal agency. Pre-pandemic, this would have been simple for Goldman, the scientist and research director at the Center for Science and Democracy. That sounds like sinister. She focuses on making esoteric scientific information digestible for the public. But while she's caring for her 4 and 2-year-olds at home, quickly organizing talking points and looking for a clean, well-lit, and quiet part of the house, it isn't so easy. Again, is there a Mr. Goldman? She removed some items from the wall in the living room, positioned her laptop in a chair perched on the office table. This, doing interviews during the lockdown remotely, this has been going on for months. This story is giving us the impression this is the first time that this had happened, which is almost certainly untrue. She didn't bother picking up the toys strewn across the room because they wouldn't interfere with the shot. She put on a nice yellow top, but stayed in her shorts because pants have been bumped down on the priority list. I'm going to suggest this woman is either slovenly or that she has decided to celebrate the disorder because she's seeking to induce a sympathy. Can this woman cannot afford a nanny? Really? Because it sounds like a fairly well-paid job, research director at the Center for Science and Democracy. She can't afford a nanny? Really? She can't get someone to look after her children for an hour? Really? Can't do that? The refreshingly candid portrayal of the crushing position working mothers have been facing for the past 6 months resonated, and her tweet has gotten more than 220,000 likes. Just so I'm being honest. Yeah, you really should be suspicious of women who say that. No, I'm not going to clean up before an interview because I'm all about honesty. Yeah, that's not good. That's really not good. Is she the kind of person that, who just says things which are obviously going to hurt people's feelings because she's just so honest? Goldman said her reason for sharing the images was multifold. She wanted to make sure other mothers are aware that even those who look like they're managing to pull it off likely aren't. Well, she did pull it off. She also wanted to highlight what too many moms are too tired or too busy to vocalize. You should have said exhausted there. You missed a trick. Which is what they can't possibly parent or work well while simultaneously trying to accomplish both. That was the situation before the lockdown. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't have gone with that. Goldman also expressed her anger at how there's been little mention of the struggles moms are facing and little being done to support them. How about the struggles dads are facing? Why does this have to be a male versus female thing? I'm very mad about this situation, Goldman said. This is a huge problem that's going to send women back 50 years in the workforce. Oh dear, we wouldn't want that to happen. We wouldn't want to have women actually raising their own children. All the progress we've made in recent decades is going to become undone and we don't even care. It's basically a conversation nationally or barely, federally, it's barely a blip on the map. Well, Insider is here to save the day. So this organization that she is part of the Union of Concerned Scientists, as opposed to all those scientists who are unconcerned. Its motto is science for a healthy planet and a safer world. As far as I can see now, climate change. Oh, science knows, says Andrew Cuomo. It's not in reference to anything. He tweeted that yesterday. Science knows. Again, science is supposed to be about questioning. You have a hypothesis, which becomes a theory, and then people will question that and come up with an alternate hypothesis, and the theory may come to displace the previously accepted theory, but now, no, it's all carved in stone. And Donald Trump Jr. responded, what does science say about sending sick elderly patients back into nursing homes, asking for 15,000 or so families? Yes, deliberately infecting old people, causing the deaths of thousands in New York State. The Telegraph reports scientists to examine possibility COVID leaked from lab. Oh, there'd be a lab in China. Tom Borelli, PhD, responds, what a joke. Independent group to investigate origins of COVID-19, led by MSN contributor Jeffrey Sachs of Russia infamy, and Peter Daszak, who funded China Wuhan lab, a Joe Biden supporter, and said it was pure baloney virus escaped from lab. 60% of business closures due to the coronavirus pandemic are now permanent. Well, I guess that will help the climate change, right? You know, swings and roundabouts. Oh, and Newt Gingrich was being interviewed on Fox News, and by 2 or 3 women? He said the number one problem in almost all the cities is George Soros elected left-wing anti-police pro-criminal district attorneys. The Fox host said, I'm not sure we need to bring George Soros into this. And Newt Gingrich said, okay, so it's verboten? And there was a long, awkward silence. Apparently, Fox News meat puppets have been instructed not to talk about George Soros, because to criticize George Soros is, as we know, anti-Semitism. It's a hate crime. I mean, it's practically genocide, actually. Let's talk about Beethoven. I'll say off the top, Beethoven is not my favorite composer. I don't even know whether he would be in my top 10. But he revolutionized music. Now, whether that was for better or worse is an interesting question. But he produced a great deal of great music. But now he's a bad man. This is from Nate Sloan and Charlie Harding of Vox, how Beethoven's Fifth Symphony put the classicism in classical music. Beethoven's most famous work changed the way we listen and how we're supposed to listen. It begins with an anguished opening theme, da-da-da-dang, and ends with a glorious major key melody. Since its 1808 premiere, audiences have interpreted that progression from struggle to victory as a metaphor for Beethoven's personal resilience in face of his oncoming deafness. Or rather, that's long been the popular read among those in power, especially the wealthy white men. Boo! White men who embraced Beethoven and turned his symphony into a symbol of their superiority and importance. Oh, just shut up. There weren't any black people in Europe at the time, okay? There weren't any. So, hey, minorities, we have Beethoven, and he's the greatest because we say so because we're white. Yeah, take that. And these wealthy white men turned his symphony into a symbol of their superiority and importance. For some and other groups, women, alphabet people, people of color, Beethoven's symphony may be predominantly a reminder of classical music's history of exclusion and elitism. Oh dear, elitism. Oh, elitism is baked into the cake, you cretins. This is art music. You used to have church music, and you used to have folk music, and then starting, say, from, I don't know, well, arbitrarily, we'll just say Monteverdi, okay, roughly 1600, you start to get the creation of art music, which is, by definition, elitist. One New York City classical fan wrote in the 1840s, for example, that he wished all women should be gagged by officers duly licensed for the purpose before they're allowed to enter a concert room. So, Before Beethoven's time, classical music culture looked and sounded quite different. When Mozart premiered his Symphony 31 in the late 1700s, it was standard for audiences to clap, cheer, and yell da capo, once again, in the middle of a performance. Yes, and after Beethoven's Fifth Symphony debuted in the early 1800s, these norms changed, both because the rising industrial merchant class, boo, took ownership of concert halls and because of shifts in the music itself. This is actually not true. As late as Franz Liszt's career, which is decades after Beethoven premiered his Fifth Symphony, you had the da capo going on with movements being repeated by popular acclaim. But again, this is supposed to be an artistic experience. It's supposed to be an elite experience. It's not supposed to be about greatest hits. The rising industrial merchant class. Yeah, okay. You mean the people who paid for it? Because they were paying for it largely out of their own pockets, replacing the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie replaced the aristocracy, who had, treated musicians as great as Mozart and Haydn as literally as liveried servants. As we explored in episodes 1 of 2 on the Switched on Pop podcast series, the fifth, Switched on Pop, topical. The musical complexity of Beethoven's symphony required a different kind of listening. Okay. The fifth's creative rule breaking, subverting the classical sonata form in the first movement, for example, requires close listening to fully grasp. And of course, one doesn't need to listen closely to a Haydn symphony, say, or to Bach's Brandenburg concertos. No. These guys are so stupid. In Mozart's day, each movement in a symphony was self-contained. Nope, not true. Beethoven's Fifth acted more like a novel, asking audiences to follow a single story that unfolded over an entire 4-movement symphony. This is a terrible metaphor because people generally do not read novels at a stretch. They read them in bits and bytes. New norms of concert behavior developed in turn. Sitzfleisch, or sitting still, became the ultimate desideratum for showing one's understanding of the new language of classical music. No, of showing respect for the other people who have come there to listen to it. Famously, Franz Liszt stopped playing because Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, would not shut up during a concert, and he waited for the Tsar to stop before he started again, and the Tsar got the message. Concert etiquette that evolved in response to the Fifth may have had the goal of venerating the music and also act as a source of gatekeeping. Oh no, we wouldn't want that. Today, some aspects of classical culture are still about who's policing who, and policing who's in and who's out. When you walk into a standard concert hall, there's an established set of conventions and etiquette. Don't cough, don't cheer, dress appropriately. That can feel as much about demonstrated belonging as appreciating the music. Yeah, let's have a whole bunch of people hacking, coughing, and sneezing through a concert because, I don't know, isn't telling them not to cough or to stay away kind of micro aggression? Again, you cheer when it's over. You see, I don't know, a symphony can last anywhere from 20, 25 minutes. If you want to get to a Mahler symphony, 80 minutes. And cheer at the end. Beethoven's symphonies, except for the Ninth, do not last all that long, but apparently it is simply too much to ask people to sit down, keep still, and shut up for 30, 35 minutes. Just too much. For classical music critic James Bennett II, Beethoven's popularity and centrality in classical culture is part of the problem. Quote, as you perpetuate the idea that the giants of the music all look the same, it conveys to the other that there's not a stake in that music for them. Unquote. Yeah, okay, because that's what you're looking for from art. You're looking for personal validation, apparently. Is that right, James Bennett II? New York Philharmonic clarinetist Anthony McGill, one of the few black musicians in the ensemble, and I don't give a toss about that. argues that Beethoven's inescapability can make classical music appear monolithic and stifling. He likens the inescapability of the Fifth Symphony to a wall between classical music and new diverse audiences. It's funny. Beethoven came to dominate the idea of the greats in the 19th century. In the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, there's an enormous increase in the popularity of not only the pre-Beethoven composers, such as Haydn, Mozart, J.S. Bach, C.P.E. Bach, but also, let's say, Franz Schubert. Beethoven is nowhere near as dominant in concert halls as he once was. But no, for the sake of this inane argument in Vox, let's pretend that we're writing in, I don't know, 1890 or something like that. If you pretend there's no other music out there, that Beethoven is the greatest music that will ever matter, says McGill, then orchestras will alienate new listeners, since we're not promoting any of the composers alive today that are trying to become the Beethovens of their day. You see, okay. The term classical music is really a misnomer now. Classical music, the tradition died with the death of Stravinsky in, what was that, 1971? Is that when he died? He was the last of the great composers in the classical tradition. By the time that Sibelius died in 1957 and Richard Strauss died in 1949, I believe. I could be off by a year or two. But it was clear that that old tradition had come to an end for various reasons. The rise of serialism, the rise of academicism. People really striving to be the Beethovens? No, it's just, this is a straw man that they have constructed here. And it is, it's simply outrageous. I mean, there's a clickbait aspect of it. But of course, no, we don't have enough Black people in the orchestra, so we have to hire them whether they deserve to be there or not. Now, as to whether, you probably have heard that in many parts, this has been done all over North America, where they don't want people to gather, they play classical music. They broadcast it on loudspeakers. Not enough Black people are listening to classical music. I suspect that's because they prefer different kinds of music. So now we're in the business of ordering people to like certain kinds of music, because we've been told for quite some time that was wrong. That you shouldn't be listening to Sinatra, you should be listening to Schubert songs. No, that is elitist. So if Black people don't like classical music, who cares? Let's see. Some woman, a Black woman and a composer called Eleanor Alberga. I don't know who she is when she's at home. This was from a BBC story 2 years ago. Composers from minority groups are effectively silenced because they do not fit into classical music's inner club, says Eleanor Alberga. Well, I responded at the time, Western greatness, the music of Victoria, Monteverdi, Bach, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Mendelssohn, Liszt, Wagner, Brahms, Sibelius, Defaya, Ravel, Debussy, Strauss, and Glass is open to all. If Eleanor Alberga, whomever she might be, chooses to reject it, that's her loss. Yes. And then I got into a discussion last night on Twitter. First I'll talk about Bill Crystal here. Bill Crystal says an awful lot of women, alphabet people, and people of color have conducted, played, studied, and listened to or enjoyed Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. There's not an awful lot of, people of color. See, we were talking about Black people. Now we're talking about, people of color. Okay. There's Asian conductors, certainly. But to this day, conductors tend to be white and they tend to be Jewish. Yeah, that's just the way it is. Even Bill Crystal's defense of Beethoven is cringing. But of course, everything he does is cringe. James Lindsay at Conceptual James responded, With regard to Vox going after Beethoven, one in many recent examples of wokeness going after classical music, the parallels to the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which banned classical music, become more clear. I'm told, and he mentions reckon there's a documentary in this regard. Well, you see, you have these people who are still listening to classical music, or serious music, if you will, although I know a lot of people will argue with that term. Music with high ambitions, all right? And, well, I don't know, they should all be listening to WAP, right? Because it's, plus they see it as a rejection. Oh, we're better than you because we don't listen to WAP. We don't particularly care for Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. Well, why not? They're the voice of Black Lives Matter. Well, I don't know. You can't force me to listen to what I don't want to listen to. But I suppose that's the direction in which we are headed. I cut into this rabbit hole last night on Twitter. Oh, someone was talking gayness in music, and someone brought up ABBA. And I love ABBA, as all good people do. And I've been infuriated over the last couple of decades. Oh, ABBA's a gay thing. Well, ABBA sold, the estimates of how many records ABBA has sold is anywhere from, 150 million to 320 million people. You don't get to sell that many records by being niche. Oh, they dressed up in costumes. Okay. Most people dressed up in costumes playing popular music in the 1970s. That was the style. Now, I don't know, these handmade costumes that the guys and gals of ABBA wore, I don't know, I find them rather quaint, you know. I don't think, if you look at ABBA, they didn't really have much of an understanding of music outside Sweden. If you want to go back to the time when ABBA was founded, late 60s, early 70s, you still had unique, distinct musical cultures in different parts of Europe. That is no longer the case. There's a monoculture there, and it tends to be thump, 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 or some, I don't know, sexually indeterminate adolescent being auto-tuned to moan about love or something like that. But if you listen to ABBA's first couple of records, you find them assimilating every popular musical form that exists. If you listen to a song like Hey, Hey, Helen, which is a favorite of mine, which is a critique of feminism, no less, you have this bizarre mixture of glam, that glam thump, along with Fender Rhodes piano, like 70s soul music, and it is absolutely bizarre. But you see ABBA, okay, let's do a reggae song, let's do this, let's do a country song, let's do all these songs, and eventually they synthesized a unique sound from that. No. Oh, such and such is and someone brought up, oh, what about, Liberace and Barry Manilow? Liberace always denied that he was a homosexual. In fact, he famously won, or notoriously won, a huge defamation judgment from a British tabloid, which didn't even say he was homosexuality, merely pointed out that he was, swishy. Barry Manilow didn't admit for the very longest time that he was homosexual. Same with Elton John. And there are obvious reasons for that, because one does not want to be pushed into a niche situation. Oh, Michael Jackson is the other one. Yeah. And I'll tell you how you get to sell an enormous amount of records. You do that by the fact that your records, or recordings, I suppose we call them today, are bought by people who don't normally buy recordings or buy very little. Because if you look at a record like Michael Jackson's Thriller, that's one of those records that there are millions of people who buy, say, one record a year, and that was the record they bought. That is to say, this is indicative of a very broad base of support, not niche support. And these people dragged in is somehow gay music. Maria Callas. There's nothing gay about Maria Callas at all, of course, who was an opera soprano, but certain homosexuals have made a cult of her for decades. And so that great artist has been dragged into that nasty ghetto. Let's have a look here. Ronald P. says Zeppelin used the ABBA studios for In the Outdoor. Suddenly ABBA had become more credible to me. I just, when Waterloo became a hit, and by the way, the Eurovision, gay. Didn't used to be like that. It didn't used to be like that. It's only in, the last 10 or 15 years that it's become a gay institution with actual transvestites, women with beards and the like, winning and being chosen for that reason. But when Waterloo became a hit, I was very heartened by this because pop music had pretty much disappeared by that time. And then when SOS became a hit, I thought, this is even better because they've had 2 hits now. Maybe they're not going to disappear. And then they continued to amaze us for years after that. I just wish that they hadn't come to full fruition in the days of disco. A song like Dancing Queen Say is great, but I'd like it a little better if it weren't a disco tune, because as I previously mentioned, ABBA had demonstrated that they could handle any form of music. There's people calling ABBA a gay act. You know that they were 2 heterosexual couples in that band, right? So I don't know what these people see Muriel's Wedding or whatever, and they think, oh, ABBA, gay band. Is that how simple it is? My Trail of Disgrace says there's a great cover of Hey, Hey, Helen by Lush, and I've heard that, and it is a great cover. The thing about Lush was, the shoegaze band, and I love shoegaze, that you couldn't understand what they were singing about. And then in one of their later recordings, they decided to change their sound somewhat. And you could hear the words, and it was a huge disappointment because, it's 2 girls moaning about boys. I got the impression somehow that lyrics were better than that. That's really one of the advantages of lyrics being obscure in the production, because what I do is I take what I hear and then I add my own words, and it often ends up being better than what the actual words are. Jim Smith says, I love Wagner's music, but have never listened to the entire Ring cycle. I wonder if KMG has. Yes, indeed, I have. And of course, now you have the advantage of you can get it on DVD or Blu-ray. So you could get the full visual effect. James Levine and the Met has a Blu-ray set. Yes, I know about James Levine and what he has done. But it is very well played, and it is very well directed and costumed. It is not this horrible Euro trash reggae theater, Dionysus says KMG is called kitsch. What is kitsch? ABBA? I don't think that ABBA is kitsch. ABBA wrote some of the most powerful and affecting songs about relationships that anyone has. And of course, you could just ask Steve Coogan about that, or watch the first season of The Trip, which is there's a great deal about ABBA in there. No, as I say, all good people love ABBA. What else do we have in the chat here? Conchita Wurst, alphabet pioneer. Accursed image. Dionysus says, I've spent 15 years on and off studying Wagner. Halper wrote, after that Lush song, they broke up after that album. Yes, they come back together, I believe, because there's so much nostalgia for bands that really weren't all that popular, which tells me that what we see in the music industry now is a mile wide and an inch deep. I mean, seriously, if the shoegaze bands were nothing in the United States. They were a little more popular in Canada, but they weren't, all that big in Britain. But now they all seem to be getting back together, which is great because I loved shoegaze, which was a genre which I think disappeared before its time, just like trip hop. I loved trip hop, and then it just seemed to vanish after only a couple of years. My Trail of Disgrace says Bjorn Ulvaeus relates meeting a Sex Pistols member, maybe John Lydon, who told him that a chord sequence in Pretty Vacant was taken from SOS. Well, Glenn Matlock, there was a story for years and years, is that Glenn Matlock was kicked out of the Sex Pistols because he liked ABBA. And I don't know, I think this story was made up. Also, the story that is, I know that Steve Jones is very upset that, supposedly Glenn Matlock wrote all the tunes, and Steve Jones says that isn't true. And John Lydon says that, yes, supposedly I hated Glenn Matlock because he was too pop, The Sex Pistols were, to a large extent, a manufactured band, and they had a manager, Malcolm McLaren, who had learned a lot from, say, Andrew Logue Oldham, and manufacturing controversy all the time. Mary Crow says SOS, arguably the greatest pop song. It is perfection. It absolutely is. And on that happy note, I'm going to wrap up today's show. Tomorrow, we have Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be discussing 6 cartoons by Tex Avery. And on Friday on the book club, I am going to be talking about Willa Cather's Death Comes for the Archbishop. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, very much appreciated in this time of a great flux in my own situation. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, you can send me money directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these times of social atomization, civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.